I am Elena. The night my parents died, my flashlight caught a pair of unfamiliar shoes under the dining table shoes that still carried crumbs of lotus cake laced with thallium. 3 hours later, I found my own forged signature on an $500 K mortgage and realized the killer wore a family face and I was just the price tag. A hidden camera captured my aunt sneaking into the mansion at 2:13 a.m. to burn the evidence, yet that fire will consume her in court. If you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Smash that subscribe button before we start, and don't miss the next shocking stories dropping right here. This story began on a night without snow, without cake, just a 1 a.m. phone call, and from that moment on, I no longer had a home to return to. The rain had been falling since dusk, needling the wide windows of Saigon Central Hospital with an impatient staccato, but the trauma bay ignored the weather the way it ignored everything that wasn't bleeding. Overhead lights ached white-hot. Monitors chirped, suction hissed, metal clattered in hurried hands. "Hold pressure," Elena Tran ordered, planting two gloved fingers on a jagged laceration, while the intern beside her froze in headlights of caffeine and terror. Sweat blurred the edge of her surgical visor. Somewhere behind her, a ventilator alarm keened like an anxious child. It was just another night on the third straight week of night float. 13 hours down, one more gunshot, one more middle-aged stroke, one more grandmother who forgot her insulin. Elena's muscles thrummed from adrenaline and fatigue, but the rhythm was familiar, almost comforting. In the chaos, predictability passed for peace. She packed the final suture, stripped off the bloody gloves, and pressed the stopwatch clipped to her scrub's closure time, 12 minutes. Not bad. She closed her eyes, one heartbeat, inhaled iodine and bleach, exhaled the metallic perfume of fear she never let herself show. Another resident clapped her shoulder in passing. 2 a.m. coffee, he mouthed. She nodded, then felt her pocket vibrate. Calls at this hour usually meant consults or crises, but her phone number was a private trench line few people crossed. She tugged off the isolation gown, stepped into the narrow equipment corridor, and fished out the device. Number unknown glowed against the cracked protective glass. Something in her chest pinched. She scrubbed a thumb over accept. A voice she didn't recognize, low and formal, slid through a sliding door of static. Xin Chao Baxitran. Are you related to Mr. and Mrs. Fung Vun? This is Lieutenant Bui of the Ho Sung Mu District Police. Elena straightened. They're my parents, she answered in Vietnamese, so crisp it startled her. Most days she thought in English medical shorthand. What happened? The lieutenant cleared his throat. That sound, the bureaucratic preamble to something irretrievably broken, would echo for years. There's been an accident on Highway 16 near the North Causeway. Single vehicle. I am sorry to inform you both, occupants were pronounced dead at the scene. Her heartbeat did something impossible, folding in on itself like wet paper, then uncrumpling too fast. Are you sure? Stupid question. She was the doctor. She knew when pronouncements were final. We recovered their identification. A pause so heavy she could feel its weight in her palm. I'm terribly sorry, Co. A blood pressure cuff hissed in the room beyond. A nurse laughed at a dark joke about burr holes and bureaucracy. Elena watched the laughter through a window and felt the world step back. 3 paces take the color with it, leave her standing alone on an antiseptic lunar surface. Her throat tightened, but no tears rose. Instead, training took over. Gather facts, triage emotion later. What time did it occur? Was there another vehicle involved? Where are they now? The lieutenant answered each patient perfunctory. 22, 17 hours. No witnesses besides an empty tollbooth camera. Bodies transferred to the district morgue awaiting next of kin. Personal effects secure. An evidence case number she'd repeat in her sleep. When the call ended, she sank back against a cold metal cabinet stacked with sterile drapes. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, strobing the hallway. She wiped her eyes dry and stared at her reflection in the cabinet's brushed steel. Pupils dilated, mask rakishly crooked hair matted to her temple. You can't fall apart here, she told the woman in the mirrored steel. Not where families need you whole. She marched to the attending's office, requested emergency leave with a voice she barely recognized, but that carried its own authority, the way a scalpel carries inevitability. Paperwork would wait. Flights were a blur at 2 hours' notice, so she booked a long-haul bus north instead. A nurse handed her a rain-spotted duffel bag, someone's lost gym kit, into which she stuffed her wallet, a wrinkled set of street clothes, and the small black notebook that never left her coat. Someone called her name. Another asked if she was okay. She nodded once, lie accepted because the trauma bay had no bandwidth for other tragedies. Outside, water hammered the awning like drumfire. Neon reflections bled across puddles in pink and acid green. She zipped her jacket, pulled the hood low, and stepped into the downpour that felt strangely appropriate, the sky crying because she could not. 2:47 a.m. At the Bin Tay terminal, buses idled and exhales of diesel drifted across cracked asphalt. Elena queued at an ancient window where an old woman in a frayed cardigan sold tickets with a stamp pad and a cigarette drooping from her lip. Ho Sung Moo single. The clerk glanced up, then down, as if reading grief as easily as a route map. She stamped a faded blue ticket that smelled of ink and jasmine tea slitted under plexiglass. The bus itself was a relic, cracked vinyl seats, overhead fans that rattled like bone wind chimes, an aisle sticky with unidentifiable syrup. Elena claimed the rearmost window seat, set her duffel on her lap like a defensive shield, and stared through streaked glass as the city pulled away in slow pan, shot a neon diorama fading to cobalt darkness. Raindrops streaked across the window, each one catching spectral light from fluorescence overhead. They looked like comets surrendering their tails. Elena tracked them, letting the pattern hypnotize, gather, elongate, vanish. Her mind rehearsed the autopsy of a moment she hadn't witnessed, the spinning headlights, the guardrail's lethal angle. Her mother's startled gasp, the heavy hush after metal screamed. Had they felt pain? Did they call her name? Had they argued about something trivial? Radio static directions seconds before impact? She would never know. Grief is a science of unanswerable questions. The bus lurched forward, gears grinding. In her white-knuckled grip, the phone buzzed again, a text from Chi, her best friend in Manila rotation. Heard you left early. Everything okay? Elena hovered over the keyboard, typed. Parents died, deleted it, typed. Family emergency, deleted that too. Then powered the phone off. Language felt too small for the collapse of a universe. Lights dimmed. Television monitors played a dubbed kung fu movie no one watched. The scent of damp wool and fried garlic thickened the air. Elena leaned her forehead against cool glass. Somewhere along the highway's ribcage, Saigon's glow gave way to ink-black delta wetlands and the intermittent flash of petrol stations. Each kilometer carried her farther from the sterile certainty of operating theaters into the wasteland of what now. Minutes bled together, though her watch still ticked with smug precision. She remembered being 6, falling from a banyan tree and fracturing her wrist. Her mother had run the red lights to the district clinic, singing an off-key lullaby to drown sirens. She remembered her father teaching her to parallel park between 2 bicycles because that was all they owned, declaring precision saves accidents con. Irony tasted bitter now. Lightning forked across low clouds, illuminating dragon fruit orchards and abandoned mileposts. The driver muttered a prayer, steering hand, one palm open on wooden beads. Passengers slept in contorted shapes, dreamless or dreaming of better roads. Elena tried to catalog what would need doing: morgue paperwork, funeral rites, death certificates, estate taxes, an algorithm of bereavement measured in stamps and signatures. She wrote tasks in the black notebook, bullet points perfectly, aligned ink unshaken. Dr. Reflex treat grief like a patient, diagnose, stage manage. Yet between those lines, another list formed a shadow triage. Why didn't they call me before driving? Why that highway at night? Why the lieutenant's hesitant tone as though he expected questions he couldn't answer? Mystery nested within tragedy, and some distant colder part of her clicked awake, the part that thrived on puzzles because puzzles obeyed rules. The bus stopped at a roadside diner, fluorescent peeling paint, the obligatory rooster wrought iron sign. Passengers shuffled off to drink hakao broth and weak coffee. Elena stayed in her seat, palms pressed to her eyes so hard stars bloomed. She couldn't bear fluorescent kindness from strangers. When they reboarded, someone left a plastic cup of tea by her elbow. Steam curled like a question mark. She whispered thank you to no one visible. 2 hours to dawn, she estimated. The drizzle eased and fog replaced it, a milky veil seeping from river shallows. She recognized the shift. Ho Sung Moo Mist Lake earned its name honestly. Childhood visits flashed fishing lines drawn through silver vapor, a hillside pagoda dissolving in morning haze, the taste of lotus seeds boiled in syrup. Her mother swore cured everything from colds to heartbreak. Heartbreak. The word finally fit, slid into her chest like a scalpel nick. She felt pain bloom quick and mean and clutched the duffel tighter. The bus rumbled over wet gravel, every bump an accusation. You work miracles for strangers, and when your own parents needed you, you were 24 floors above saving someone else. She knew survivor guilt pathology cold, had counseled families on it in windowless rooms, but lived experience rewrote textbooks. No rationalizations sutured this wound. A dull blue glow crept up the horizon. Silhouettes of pine and eucalyptus broke its edge. The highway narrowed guardrails, rusted potholes filled with moonlight. She smelled peat fires in distant kitchens, heard a stray dog bark at the bus's roar. The driver announced stops in local dialect through a microphone that squealed. Kau Musung, Tramkui, 05:58 a.m. The bus hissed to a halt outside a shuttered petrol station where fog pooled like spilled milk. Elena stepped onto pavement, slick as glass, rolling her shoulders against the cold. The air tasted of pine tar and something faintly metallic memory or invention. She hoisted the duffel, scanned for a taxi, found only silence. A battered 90s Toyota pickup idled under a single sodium lamp. The driver leaned out cigarette embers, illuminating crow's feet. "Town center," he asked. She nodded. The cab smelled of petrol-damp wool and decades of stories no one wrote down. A rosary swung from the rear view, tapping out a slow Morse code against the glass. The pickup crawled along cobblestone streets flanked by colonial facades gone moss green. Closed shutter signs faded to ghosts. In the half-light, the town looked abandoned, a postcard lost in the mail. Mist curled around street lamps, swallowing distance. She remembered buying steamed sticky rice from a cart right here, the vendor's gold tooth glinting. That cart was gone or perhaps never existed outside childhood memory. They turned onto Willow Crescent and she saw the morgue's stark rectangular outline floodlights bleaching its walls. Elena inhaled so sharply the driver glanced at her. She composed her face. He turned away. 7 minutes, she calculated. 7 minutes from the morgue to her parents' house. 7 minutes to step over a threshold that would never feel the same. The number felt ritualistic. Time divvied into manageable doses like morphine. But first, the morgue. The pickup stopped beneath a flickering light. "Wait," the driver offered. "No?" She page-shouldered the duffel, footsteps crunching gravel that sparkled under arc lamp glare. A night clerk buzzed her through double doors. Inside, chill air knifed her lungs chemical with formalin. He led her down a corridor lined with metal drawers. The hum of walk-in coolers was toneless, devoid of mercy. Drawer 14 slid open with a mortician's hush. 2 tags dangled: Phung Van Vin, age 63. Lei Tian, age 59. Elena braced a hand on stainless steel and forced herself to look. They seemed smaller, as if death drained not just life, but dimension. Bruises haloed their temples. Dried blood at her mother's hairline formed the shape of a crescent moon she used to trace on Elena's cheek. A sob climbed her throat but died behind clenched teeth. She reached, but gloves barred skin. She whispered instead, "Converoy. I'm home." The clerk closed the drawer. Paperwork would follow daylight, he said. She signed preliminary release forms in handwriting suddenly foreign. When she stepped outside, dawn had bruised the sky lilac. Fog thinned just enough to reveal distant rooftops. The lake shimmered faintly, a mirror with secrets. From her duffel, she pulled a surgical mask and slid it on, not for germs, but anonymity. She started walking toward the old house on Anise Lane luggage, bouncing against her hip, the lieutenant's case number echoing in each step. Somewhere ahead waited condolences, incense, and the awful music of grief. She rehearsed phrases, "Camon Daden," "Toyon." None felt true. But under the mask, her lips formed words destined only for the mist. "I thought I was coming back for a funeral." She paused, tasted the cold air, finished the sentence she didn't yet understand. "Turns out I'm coming back for the truth." The lake kept its counsel, reflecting nothing but unfinished sky. The bells of St. Clement's Chapel tolled with reluctant gravity. 5 slow notes that vibrated through damp mist and settled over the mourners like lead. Dawn was a bruise behind the clouds, unwilling to brighten Ho Sung Mu, and rain drifted sideways in a rhythmic sheets. Elena Tran stood beside the twin coffins, her mother's and her father's, holding a black umbrella that shivered in the wind. She wore the only dark suit she owned, hastily steamed in a motel bathroom an hour earlier. Its shoulders felt too wide, her grief too narrow to fill the fabric. She kept her eyes on the soil turned up for burial, refusing the generous invitations of memory. When the priest intoned final prayers, his voice seemed to echo inside a metal can. Every syllable clanged against the hollowness she carried in her ribs. Only the scent of damp chrysanthemums tethered her to the present earthy medicinal, a smell she associated with sweat-slick emergency wards more than cemeteries. Families drifted toward a ramshackle pavilion where plastic chairs waited in ragged rows. Elena followed last, aware of each squeak her wet shoes made on mossy tile. Amid the silver blur of umbrellas, she noticed a woman she did not recognize, dressed in a lacquer black dye that swallowed ambient light. The woman's stillness set her apart. Even rain seemed to detour around her posture. A cousin leaned close and whispered, "That's Aunt Fung. Your father's sister flew in yesterday on a red-eye from Sydney." The name rang hollow, a note from an instrument Elena didn't know she owned. She combed childhood memories, Lunar New Year feasts, school recitals, hospital graduations, but found no face to match the title. It felt like discovering a hidden page in a diary you'd written every day of your life. Under the pavilion, rain hammered the tin roof in relentless percussion. Styrofoam cups of scalding cinnamon tea were pressed into hands and condolences piled up like wet leaves. Elena responded on autopilot, mouth forming polite thanks, while her mind lagged kilometers behind. Then Aunt Fung approached. "Dr. Tran," she said in crisp English, colored by coastal Australian vowels, "your reputation precedes you." The compliment sounded sharpened. Elena replied, "I'm still a resident, the correction small but necessary." Fung slid a lacquered fan between elegant fingers. "Titles are temporary. Family, however, is supposed to endure." Lightning crackled over the lake. Thunder scrolled across the low sky, punctuating the word supposed. Conversation hushed. Elena felt bodies shift closer, not for warmth, but to witness. Fung's gaze held hers. "Your parents were generous," the aunt observed in Vietnamese, now each tone precise. "Generosity should remain their legacy." The implication smelled of claim. Before Elena could respond, a baritone voice cut through drizzle. A man in a charcoal suit, shoes unmarred by mud, introduced himself as Hu Dung, attorney for the estate. He apologized for grievous timing, but Vietnamese law required reading the will while direct heirs were assembled. The pavilion morphed into a courtroom. Even the rain seemed to pause, listening at the edges. Mourners formed a semicircle as Dung unsealed a thick envelope. The will, first read in Vietnamese, then echoed in English, was startlingly brief. After settling minor debts, all monetary assets went to small charities. The ancestral residence at 12 Willow Crescent, its land contents and associated trusts, passed exclusively to Elena Marie Tran. No contingencies, no partial shares. Gasps fluttered around her like startled sparrows. Elena's heart clenched, not from fortune, but from whiplash. She had expected paperwork, not a mansion hidden inside a sentence. Silence thickened until a soft clack announced Fong's fan snapping shut. "Our customs favor shared stewardship," she said in Vietnamese, voice velvet over steel. "An only child should not shoulder that burden alone." Courtesy cloaked challenge. Elena steadied her cup on a folding table. "My father expressed his wishes clearly." She answered, anger threading into English because her Vietnamese vowels trembled. Fung's smile stayed painted, but her eyes cooled a degree. "Sometimes wishes are edited before they're signed," she murmured. Attorney Dung raised a hand, launching into statutes about notarization and digital video of the signing. Each clause sounded like another nail securing the coffin of dispute. Fung's nostrils flared, the single fracture in her composure. Then she inclined her head. "Family will discuss privately," she conceded, retreating into the murmuring crowd. The tension unwound, but left a residue thick as smoke. Elena exhaled, lungs stinging from breath she hadn't realized she held. The lawyer's gaze met hers, a silent assurance the document would withstand scrutiny, but uncertainty still crawled under her skin like static. Formalities done, mourners dispersed into rain-slick streets. Snippets floated back to Elena, flight rebookings, hotel rates, conjecture about the mysterious house. She lingered near the chapel gate until Aunt Fong reappeared beside her umbrella, angled like a blade. "I'll visit the house tomorrow," the aunt declared, as though possession were 9/10 intonation. Elena replied evenly, "I'll let you know when I finish the inventory, granting no permission, no denial." Fung's eyes held stories Elena wasn't ready to read. After a beat, the older woman nodded once and melted into the thinning crowd. A rental sedan idled for Elena, courtesy of the law office. She slumped into the back seat, rainwater dripping from her hair onto leather. The driver offered condolences in a whisper before steering through lanes lined with shuttered cafes and lichen-eaten balconies. Saigon's neon felt galaxies away. Here, street lamps flickered like dying stars. Each familiar landmark carried an afterimage of childhood, her father buying sugarcane juice, her mother adjusting a bicycle helmet, but reality overlay those memories with erasure, and Elena felt like she was trespassing inside someone else's life. The sedan turned onto Willow Crescent, a private road veiled by eucalyptus. Fog devoured the headlights until they illuminated only a swirling veil. Then iron gates surfaced from the mist, twin herons wrought mid-flight wings spanning the drive. Tires crunched over gravel that shone like obsidian. The mansion appeared piece by piece, first a stained glass rose window glowing with blue fragments of dawn, then limestone walls streaked by decades of rain, finally a portico supported by pillars carved with peonies. Elena pressed a palm to the glass heartbeat, trip-hammering. Nothing in her parents' modest apartment hinted they owned such grandeur. She stepped onto the portico, turned a brass key that slid home with unsettling ease, and pushed the door inward. Stale perfume billowed out, camphor, old paper, a ghost of jasmine incense. Marble tiles and a checkerboard faded by dust stretched toward a grand staircase curling upward like a petrified wave. Chandeliers dozed beneath canvas shrouds, crystals dull yet suggestive of past brilliance. Elena's footsteps echoed in a house that seemed to breathe a low inhale of curiosity and warning. She wandered room to room, a trespasser in her own lineage. The library's glass front shelves held first editions of Hugo and Ho Xuan Hung. A music salon cradled a Steinway beneath a moth-eaten velvet cover. The kitchen's copper pots gleamed above a tiled hearth blanketed in ash soft as gray snow. Evidence of lives fully lived and deliberately hidden coalesced around her. She thought of nights her parents claimed overtime shifts, weekends visiting old friends, and wondered if those alibis were really pilgrimages to this secret estate. In the dining hall, a banquet table for 20 stretched beneath a ceiling fresco of mythic birds. Dust filmed each crystal glass except one at the head recently disturbed. Elena imagined her father rehearsing speeches to invisible guests, practicing confessions he never delivered. On a sideboard stood a silver frame, a young couple beside a 1950s Peugeot, the woman visibly pregnant. On its back, her mother had written, "For the child who will inherit our horizons." The inscription pierced Elena like ice shrapnel. The house wasn't forgotten, it was postponed. Promises deferred become debts owed. She set the photo down, caught her reflection in a tarnished mirror, and saw both explorer and intruder. Anger flickered, directed not at Feng, not yet, but at two people newly buried for locking away an encyclopedia of their past while handing her a pamphlet of half-truths. The rain eased to droplets plinking gutter iron. Elena locked the door, the brass key hot from her grasp, and stepped onto sodden gravel. The mansion's facade loomed behind her like a silent witness. Frogs croaked from a lily trench, while a distant train horn drifted across the lake. She pocketed the key, its weight anchoring resolve, and whispered to the mist, "Tomorrow I start reading every page." Then she walked toward a street lamp where the road curved back to town, her shadow ribboning over puddles, carrying nothing but a bag and determination to cleave the thin white fog. The mansion creaked when she entered again, not like a haunted house, but like an old throat clearing itself before speaking. Morning light filtered in through the tall cathedral windows in fractured shards, illuminating dust in vertical columns like trapped souls trying to escape. Elena had returned alone hours after the burial, dressed now in jeans and a hooded windbreaker. She didn't come back to mourn, not this time. This time she came to understand. In her hand was the brass skeleton key, slightly tarnished, warm from the heat of her palm. It fit too easily into the lock, as if it had always known her grip. The moment she crossed the threshold, something shifted. Not in the air, though it was cold, but somewhere behind her ribcage. The silence wasn't absence. It was storage. This house had been waiting, and it was full. The grand foyer gave way to a long hallway lined with closed doors. To her left, a parlor room where velvet furniture slumped under white sheets. To her right, a dining room with a chandelier that hung like an accusation, its crystals dulled by time. She ignored both, heading straight toward the double doors at the back of the hall, heavy mahogany carved with lotus blossoms. Inside, what awaited her wasn't a family room or a study. It was an archive. A large walnut desk dominated the room's center, and behind it were floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with file boxes, binders, accordion folders. The kind of room not designed for memory but for management. She reached for the nearest box labeled in faded marker Tai-san and Fap Li, E.M. Tran, her initials. No prefix of Mr. or Mrs., no mention of her parents' names, just hers. Her heart stalled a beat, then picked up with more force than before. Inside were property deeds, insurance policies, notarized forms, and what chilled her most, Bank documents stamped, signed, authenticated, with her name on them. And her signature. Only it wasn't hers. She lifted one page, stared. The signature curled at the T exactly like hers did when she rushed. The loop of the E was slightly exaggerated, like it had always been when she first learned cursive in 6th grade. It was disturbingly accurate, but not quite. The final flourish at the tail of her name, her private tick-a-downward hook she'd added in med school, was missing. Her fingers trembled as she rifled through more papers. Title 12. Willow Crescent. Owner, Elena Marie Tran. Mortgage initiation date, 6 years ago. Lender, Southern Prosperity Cooperative Bank. Cosigner none. She dropped into the leather desk chair with a dull thud. Her legs had forgotten their job. 6 years ago, she had just entered medical school. She'd been living off ramen, rotating between 3 different roommates, tutoring at night to cover rent. She remembered turning down a credit card that year because she was afraid of debt. And yet, according to these documents, she had applied for a long-term mortgage on a mansion in the mist-shrouded belly of a town she hadn't visited since high school. Her head buzzed. She pulled her phone out, hands clumsy, fingers stiff from cold and adrenaline. She called the number printed on the loan documentation's Southern Prosperity Cooperative's customer line. It rang 5 times. A chipper voice answered, "Thank you for calling SPCB. This is Lynn. How can I assist you today?" Elena swallowed. "Hi, I need to verify some information on a mortgage loan under my name." "Sure," the agent said. "Do you have the loan account number?" Elena read it off the paper slowly, carefully. "Thank you. Can I confirm the last 4 digits of your social?" She hesitated, then gave them. A pause. Keystrokes. "Yes, I see it here," Lynn replied. "Loan was opened in May 2018. Last payment posted December of last year. Account is currently in good standing. Would you like to change your billing address or set up online access?" "I know," Elena said quickly. "I didn't open this loan. I've never owned a home. I need to report this as fraud." Another pause. A longer one. Lynn's voice changed tone, softening. "Ms. Tran, has anyone else ever had access to your personal identification? A family member, perhaps?" Elena blinked. "Why? It's just that, well, everything checks out here. The original application was completed in branch, in person." Her mouth went dry. "Which branch?" Lynn replied, "Our Ho Sung Mu office." "Of course!" Elena ended the call, her breath ragged. A second later, she slammed the binder shut. The echo bounced off marble tile like a gunshot. She stood up too fast and knocked over a stack of folders. They scattered on the floor, spilling receipts, printouts, withdrawal slips, some dating back nearly a decade. And every one of them bore her name. Phone plans, utility bills, car insurance policies, a cable subscription from 2019. None of it hers. But all of it billed to her identity. She stared at one document, a recurring withdrawal form labeled electricity. Account holder Elena M. Tran. Beneficiary address 12 Willow Crescent. Not just ownership. She had been paying for this house for years, without ever being invited. Something primal, a mixture of nausea and betrayal, rose through her throat and sat like lead behind her sternum. This wasn't a mistake. This was design. She staggered to her feet and began gathering every single document that looked remotely financial. By the time her adrenaline dimmed, she had 5 folders arranged by category: real estate, banking, utilities, insurance, and miscellaneous. She returned to the desk, pulled open the side drawers. One was filled with envelopes, some opened, some still sealed. A few were addressed to her, postmarked locally, forwarded to her school address years ago but apparently never received. Others were more damning letters from banks offering loan extensions, refinancing options, and service upgrades, all in her name. She opened one from Prosperity Bank dated 3 years ago. "Dear Ms. Tran, we're pleased to inform you that your credit continues to perform above national benchmarks. You've been pre-qualified for a second residential loan up to 2.8 billion VND. Your loyalty is appreciated." Her breath caught. They had used her credit to expand. They had used her trust to build this castle of theft. She pulled out her laptop and began cross-checking the account numbers on the documents with the ones in her password manager. 2 of them matched entries she had no memory of creating. One utility account had autopay set up with her primary checking account. Her account. She opened her banking app. Balance lower than she remembered. Recent charges, 2 utility withdrawals, both from accounts linked to 12 Willow Crescent, as recently as last month. Elena stood paced, then returned to the chair and stared at the pile of paper. Every line item was evidence. But to who? She opened her notes app and typed a single word: why. Then underneath the question she hadn't said aloud yet, why would they do this to me? Why had her parents, her meticulous, overly polite, humble parents, allowed this? And worse, why hadn't they ever told her? She could almost hear her mother's voice, soft and sing-song, brushing the edge of discomfort with practiced sweetness. "We didn't want to burden you, Con. You were already so busy." Busy saving lives while her own was being mortgaged in the background. Elena stood again and wandered to the parlor. The sheets still covered the furniture ghost shapes in the dim light. She yanked one off, revealing an antique writing desk and above it a corkboard. There were pinned receipts, family photos, and in the corner an ID photo of her, cut from her old university badge, thumbtacked above a list written in her mother's handwriting. Elena, stable income. Elena, pays on time. Elena, approved for credit. Elena, trustworthy. Each line a commendation. Each line a weapon. Suddenly she didn't feel like a daughter anymore. She felt like a resource. A well they had drawn from, quietly, consistently, because they believed it was their right. Because she never said no. Because she thought saying no would make her less of a good child. She grabbed the photo, tore it down, and folded it into her palm like a crumpled note she would never read again. Back in the study, she boxed the documents she'd found. She labeled them. She took photos of the most damning ones and uploaded them to a new hidden cloud folder, just in case. And when she was done, she sat on the cold leather chair again, stared at the key on the desk, and whispered the only sentence that made any sense in the fog of betrayal. I own a place I've never been allowed to live in. The house groaned as if in agreement, then went quiet again, too quiet. And in that silence, Elena knew this was only the beginning of something she hadn't asked for, but would finish on her terms. The highway looked unnatural in daylight, too clean for disaster, its asphalt ribbon shining under a white sun that had finally burned the fog away. Lieutenant Bowie parked the squad car on the shoulder and stepped out with the stiff gravity of someone attending a second funeral. Elena joined him, zipper pulled to her chin, notebook wedged beneath one arm. To the left, the guardrail bent outward like a cracked rib. Beyond it, pine needles carpeted a slope that plunged toward the lake shore. Orange evidence flags dotted the ground at precise intervals. At each flag, a forensic marker labeled distance in centimeters, skid-length, yaw angle. A crow watched from a branch head, tilting as if it too had theories. Bowie gestured to a cluster of technicians crouched near the scarred tarmac. First responders reported heavy rain visibility, 30 meters, but these marks don't match hydroplaning, he said. Elena knelt mindful of traffic cones and traced gloved fingers an inch above the blackened streak. The rubber smear ran straight for 3 meters, then curved sharply left before vanishing at the torn guardrail. No S-curve, she muttered, recalling accident reconstruction lectures. No counter-steer correction. This was a controlled brake, not a loss of traction. Bowie nodded. Exactly. Driver braked hard once, didn't fight the pull, like someone who expected the car to veer. A technician approached with a tablet displaying drone photos overhead shots of the sedan's final resting place among splintered saplings. Elena scanned them, eyes narrowing. The driver's side window had been rolled halfway down. Her father never drove with the window open in rain. He hated drafts. She flipped to a thermal overlay. Heat signatures were long gone, but the sensor registered a faint plume near the trunk hinge traces of evaporated accelerant. She handed the tablet back, pulse ticking faster. Were accelerant tests run? The tech shook his head. Negative for gasoline or alcohol. But tires were overinflated by 12 psi, enough to reduce grip on wet pavement, Elena Bowie said quietly. I know. Confirmation bias is a risk. Grief wants a culprit. She appreciated the caution, but data trumped sympathy. Bias doesn't carve a rail like that, she answered, pointing at the twisted metal. Something guided them off this road. They walked downhill where wheel ruts cut through pine mulch. Torn branches lay scattered like dropped green knives. The car already towed had left indentations that smelled of coolant and sap. A small shrine, a bowl of rice, a stick of incense had been placed by volunteers. Smoke curled delicate spirals into the bright morning. Elena pressed her hand to her sternum, a silent apology for disturbing the ground, then rose with new resolve. Back at the morgue, fluorescent lights hummed over stainless steel. The pathologist, Dr. New, greeted them with the austere calm of someone who spent her life among the silent. Preliminary talks is complete, she announced, sliding 2 folders across the autopsy table. Elena opened the first. Grids of numbers glared up at her. Ethanol negative, benzodiazepines negative, carboxyhemoglobin normal, but a single entry in bold caught her attention, thallium 37 Ug-L. She exhaled slow. Thallium, the poison of forgotten spy novels, odorless, tasteless, accumulating over weeks until nervous tissue surrendered. Her medical training summoned symptoms: tingling extremities, hair loss, abdominal pain, slow death disguised as illness. Was hair analyzed? She asked. Enhu tapped a clipboard. Yes. Both victims showed segmental deposition consistent with at least 3 months' exposure. Not dietary. Concentration too high. Bowie cursed under his breath. How would someone get thallium these days, rodenticide in unregulated markets? Elena replied automatically, mind already sprinting ahead. Or imported herbal tonics. Memory flickered a month ago. A cardboard box had arrived in her Saigon apartment, no return address filled with vacuum-sealed lotus cakes. Her mother's handwriting on the enclosed note, "From Aunt Fung, homemade. She insists you freeze half." Elena had taken 2 pastries to the residence lounge, then forgotten the rest in a crowded freezer. Her parents, though they'd called that night, praising Fung's thoughtfulness and joking about calorie guilt. Elena's stomach tightened. Could contamination begin there? She flipped through photos on her phone until she found the snapshot she'd texted her mother. 3 pale cakes on a blue plate. She zoomed in. On the edge of the wrapper, a faint sticker in English, imported by Sapphire Wellness Thai Limited Australian, Fung's adopted home. Elena Bui's voice snapped her back. She relayed the dessert delivery, the label, the timeline. He scribbled notes, jaw set. "We'll subpoena the import logs," he said. "Every package sent under her name." Elena swallowed. "Assume she used a proxy company." "Then we follow the proxy," Bui replied. "Resolve like steel doors clanging shut." They moved to a light box where X-rays illuminated skeletal lattices. Hairline fractures in her father's ribs matched seatbelt force. Her mother's cervical spine showed a compression consistent with sudden deceleration. Had they felt the poison's numbness while struggling to keep the car straight? The thought made Elena's knees buckle. She gripped the counter until white spots freckled her vision. New placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Take 5 minutes," she offered. Elena shook her head. 5 minutes won't change the numbers. Instead, she studied the toxicology again, noting that both victims had lower baseline potassium common when thallium displaces essential ions. This wasn't incidental. It was dosed calculated. Back at Willow Crescent by late afternoon, she entered the kitchen with fresh eyes. Sunlight cut across black and white floor tiles, revealing patterns of flour dust in corners. On the marble island sat a wicker basket lined with gingham cloth plastic wrap peeled halfway back. Inside, more lotus cakes. She donned nitrile gloves and lifted one, sniffing. Sweet bean paste, nothing sinister. But that was thallium's trick. It floated beneath thresholds of scent. She sealed the basket in a zip bag, labeled it evidence, and placed it in a mini fridge near the study. Then she opened cabinets. Rows of herbal tinctures in brown bottles, all with labels in English and simplified Chinese: Joint Ease Detox Elixir, Tranquil Sleep, the manufacturer on every bottle, Sapphire Wellness Thai Limited, Sydney. Elena felt her pulse in her teeth. She photographed everything, then boxed the bottles with chain of custody seals. The meticulous order of the cabinet suggested ritual. Someone had been dosing for months, confident the victims trusted the cure. Back in the foyer, she noticed muddy footprints leading to the side door. Not hers, 2 large lugs-soled recent. She crouched and touched a print. Moisture still clung to the dust. Someone had been inside after the funeral. Heart thudding, she withdrew her phone and dialed Bui. Voicemail. "Lieutenant, it's Elena. There's sign of entry at the house, requesting a unit sweep." She hung up, slid the phone into her back pocket, and retrieved the fireplace poker from the parlor's stupid weapon, but heavier than fear alone. Pieces connected like iron filings drawn to a magnet. The overinflated tires could have been her father's meticulous habit, except he'd always quoted manufacturer specs. So, who serviced the car last Aunt Fung insisted on a private mechanic she trusted, Elena recalled, because the local shop overcharged tourists. That was 2 months ago. Her mother had laughed on the phone about saving money. Elena's skin prickled. Poison in the tea, sabotage in the tires, a gentle push down a wet road, the perfect fusion of chemistry and physics. A creak upstairs froze her thoughts. She tightened her grip on the poker, ascended carpeted steps that swallowed sound, and nudged open the master bedroom door. Nothing. But on the vanity lay an envelope addressed in ornate script, Elaine, the common misspelling relatives abroad used. Inside a single sheet, "Meet me tonight, 8 p.m., Garden of Clouds Pagoda. You deserve explanations." No signature. But a wax seal on the flap bore a stylized peony, the emblem etched on Aunt Fung's lacquer fan. Elena checked her watch, 6:12 p.m., less than 2 hours. She considered handing the note directly to police, yet instinct murmured that confronting the spider in her own web could yield truths the law might miss. She photographed the letter front and back, forwarded images to Bui with GPS ping, then pocketed the original. If she were bait, fine, but she'd choose the terms. At 7:30, she parked her hatchback outside the pagoda grounds. Dusk draped the garden in violet shadow. Lanterns flickered along stepping stone paths, each glow encapsulated in mist. Cricket song blended with distant bells. She approached the courtyard, senses pulled taut as ship rigging. A cloaked figure waited beneath the Bodhi tree silhouette, slim posture regal. Aunt Fong. Elena the woman greeted, voice low but clear. She wore a charcoal trench that caught lamplight like dull glass. I hoped you'd come alone. Elena kept 2 meters distance. Why the secrecy? Fung tilted her head. Privacy. Families deserve it. She extended a small porcelain cup. Tea? Warms the nerves. Elena's lip curled. I'll pass. A faint smile. You always were cautious. I learned. Silence simmered. Finally, Elena asked, Why them? Why now? A sparrow darted across lantern glow wings, a brief whisper. Fung stared at the bird, expression unreadable. Because weights must shift, my dear. Your parents clung to a house they could never afford. They would have drained you forever. I offered them absolution, a debt cleared at the cost of breath. She said it like reciting a recipe. Elena tasted bile. You poisoned them and staged a crash to wash the evidence. Fung shrugged, almost bored. Acceleration of inevitability. They were already dying of pride of poor choices. Elena stepped forward, poker still hidden beneath her coat. And the loans in my name? A girl with your career would repay them easily. A rounding error. Fung's smile thinned. I taught them convenience. But they lost discipline. She sighed as if chastising children. Your father's drama with the guardrail that was messy. Elena's hands shook. You inflated the tires, you sent the cakes, you manipulated everything. Fung's gaze sharpened. I provided solutions. They accepted. Consent is complicity. She reached into her coat pocket. Elena stiffened but emerged with only a business card. Sign the deed transfer. Keep your career and this ends cleanly. Sudden blue strobes washed the garden. Sirens echoed off Temple Stone. Bowie's voice boomed, police hands visible. Elena exhaled, tension snapping like wire. Fung's mask cracked surprise, then fury. She pivoted as if to run, but officers closed in, guns drawn. In seconds, she was cuffed, porcelain cup shattering at her feet, tea bleeding into gravel like tainted rainwater. Bowie approached Elena, eyes searching. You okay? She nodded once, though, knees liquefied beneath her. The lieutenant glanced at the broken cup. Probably laced, he muttered, bagging shards. He motioned medics forward. Elena resisted the urge to collapse and instead watched Fung being led away, trenchcoat flapping like a fallen banner. In the patrol car's backseat, Fung caught Elena's gaze through the window. Not hatred, not regret. Something closer to curiosity, as though assessing a chess opponent who'd learned an unexpected move. Then the door slammed, and the car rolled into the night, red taillights dissolving into vines of mist. Elena stood very still, arms folded tight to contain the tremor in her bones. The temple bell tolled 8 times, deliberate metallic final. Each reverberation mapped onto her heartbeat, calibrating a new rhythm. The riddle of the skid marks the poison, the pastries, the overinflated tires. They weren't fragments anymore. They meshed into a single terrible mosaic, and at its center gleamed a lesson carved in steel. Family could be architect and arsonist in the same breath. She breathed deep-tasting incense and night-blooming jasmine and let the realization settle. The accident was never an accident. It was a mechanism, cold, methodical, and she had dismantled it just in time. But justice was only the prologue. The true story, the long one, would be rewiring her life around the crater her aunt had carved. Elena squared her shoulders beneath the pagoda's lantern glow, lifted her phone, and began listing everything that still needed doing: autopsy supplements, financial injunctions, media briefing. Her voice in the memo app sounded steady, exact. When she finished, she slipped the phone away, touched the Bodhi tree's rough bark in silent gratitude, and walked toward the police cruiser's blue light, ready to translate suspicion into certainty, grief into action, and scattered doubt into an unbroken line leading straight to the truth. Elena woke before the birds, driven by the crawling certainty that somebody had resumed rummaging through her life while she slept. The mansion's timber ribs creaked overhead, as though it too sensed intrusion. She padded barefoot across the foyer. The marble was so cold it felt wet, forcing her fully awake. Overnight, she had triaged evidence into plastic crates, yet she still hadn't explored the beige desktop tower glowing faintly on the walnut desk. It was an anachronism among antiques, but its green diode pulsed like a living vein. She jiggled the mouse. The monitor bloomed with spreadsheets, each tab a muted scream. Utilities, loans, investments, and most damning transfers. She selected the last tab. A scroll bar shrank to a nub, revealing 11 years of withdrawals. Every month, 1 or 2 movements, then, after her first residency paycheck, 4, 5, sometimes 6. She traced the lines, her Saigon account, to Southern Prosperity Cooperative routing numbers she didn't recognize, then outward to entities with sterile names, Household Services Wellness Consulting. The columns glowed anemic green. A deep ache settled behind her eyes. She pressed her palms to the desk, inhaled the varnish, and clicked a hidden column. There were memos she never wrote: Mom's Treatment House Maintenance Family Fund. Whoever logged these entries understood how auditors think. She copied 2 routing numbers, 011846 and 011873, onto a sticky note. On her phone, she opened her bank app's ACH archive. The same pair grinned back at her. Whoever scripted the withdrawals possessed creativity and contempt in equal measure. Lexbase offered the rest. 011846 corresponded to an SPC branch in Bangkok. 011873 to one in Brisbane. Triangulation: Vietnam, Thailand, Australia concealed beneath routine bills. She pictured a map threaded in red twine, money bleeding southwest, then looping home in boxes of poisoned pastries. She needed an ally who could read financial entrails, Min. The investigative reporter answered on the second ring orchestral cafe noise behind him. Doc, I expected a postcard, not an SOS? I'm staring at 2 mortgages, I never signed a corporate line, I never opened, and a decade of siphons. Text me a pin, he said. I'll drive like hell. 32 minutes later, headlights swept the gate. Min emerged, raincoat snapping hair plastered to his forehead. He lugged a backpack stuffed with chargers, drives, and what looked like a portable Faraday cage. This place screams gothic crypto horror, he observed, eyes bright with delighted dread. Inside, they brewed bitter coffee on a wheezing copper stove. The dining table became a command center, laptop scanners, neon sticky pads. Min cloned Elena's flash drive, then launched in SQL scraper against SPC's public API. Green text cascaded like falling code. First mortgage, he narrated, loan ending 462, originated May 2018 for 11.2 billion dong collateral, Willow Crescent borrower, Elena M. Tran, witness, Nguyen Thi Phung. Second mortgage, 581 November 2020, collateral unspecified, likely a rental, they never closed. Business credit line, Tran Medical Consultancy, LLC, 25,000 USD balance, 7,000 drawn. Elena rubbed her temple. I was dissecting cadavers in 2018. Min zoomed into PDF metadata, uploaded from an IP in Sydney, subpoena-able. He pulled the Delaware filing. Shell Company Agent Delcorp Legal, your passport number on record. Her breath hitched. Her aunt had once photocopied the passport for a surprise. Surprise delivered. Min's grin sharpened. Classic bust-out scheme. Build credit, drain it, dump the corpse on the mark. Tor browser produced credential dumps, her national ID reused by Phuongvan79. He fired off a PGP message to hacker Kestrel, need SPC IP logs, now coffee paid. Ow. While code executed, Elena leafed printed statements. Not just withdrawals, deposits, appeared stimulus checks for a phantom consultancy, rural health tax refunds. A doppelganger, Elena harvesting benefits. The printer dinged CSV logs arrived. Min parsed them. Library in Sydney every Sunday. She logs in, moves money, logs out. During our family video calls, Elena whispered, Phase 2, the notary. Above, a bodega, incense and toner mingled. Receptionist gawked at Min's badge. Cameras make people honest or petrified. Mr. Hua shuffled out, tie crooked. Elena slid notarized copies forward. Did I sign these? He examined them. A woman resembling you did. She had ID. Ledger unlocked. Polaroid displayed a near double in a wig. Thumbprint smudged, likely latex. Min photographed everything. Will you testify? Hua hesitated. Min produced an affidavit template. Consequence gleamed. Hua nodded. In the Honda windows, fogging, Min mapped money, Elena, SPC, Sapphire Wellness, the Australian importer. Dates aligned with toxin peaks on corner charts. She bought thallium with your paycheck, he said. Elena stared ahead. She murdered them with my money. Min's phone buzzed. Editor. He kept the story dark. Bank freeze next. The SPC branch lobby smelled of eucalyptus and toner. A teller's smile collapsed when Min displayed credentials and Elena produced a police receipt. Compliance capitulated. Fraud holds locked every account. Driving through rain, Min asked, How's your head? Like amputating my own limb. At the Registry of Deeds, microfiche machines glowed. Each 3 a.m. timestamp reeked of tampering. Vehicle records showed a luxury SUV transferred into her fake company. Insurance claims covered integrative oncology treatments. The latticework widened. Post-all dinner, Min's hacker traced IPs to the Sydney Library, then Delaware filings. Stills showed Fung cloaked in trenchcoat scanning docs. Min laughed darkly. She left a constellation. Evidence blanketed the mansion table ledgers, bank letters, manifests, IP logs. Elena labeled scanned, encrypted, bagged. Min exported a 75-page dossier hold for legal source in danger. He packed up. At the gate, fresh lug tread footprints dented mud. Elena photographed bagged sample armed alarms. In the study, she composed an affidavit routing numbers, forged mortgages, shell company poisoned shipments. She signed with the hook, only she knew uploaded to 3 clouds. Birdsong brushed slate sky with rust. The chandelier's dusty crystals caught first light like dawn stars. Mold and betrayal still scented the halls, yet victory now lingered like ozone after lightning. But even as eyelids drooped, she set her phone to vibrate every 30 minutes, micronaps only. Systems this elaborate fight back. When cornered, alerts, undone ledgers burned, witnesses bought. For every dirty tactic, she now commanded circuitry of her own and allies fluent in shadows. Beyond the hedges, crickets chirped. Somewhere an engine idled, then retreated. She did not rise, meticulously catalogued the sound, archived it beside the lug tread photograph. Tomorrow she would deliver evidence to Lieutenant Bowie, to bank auditors, to any court that would listen to cold judges and jurors. Even in half-sleep, her mind rehearsed testimony. The small municipal courthouse sat at the edge of downtown like an aging librarian, prim silent, pretending disinterest in the gossip fluttering through its corridors. Yet its basement held secrets even louder than scandal, a dusty server rack hosting 6 obsolete DVR boxes, each blinking erratically as if annoyed to still be alive. Elena reached the last step and smelled century-old concrete photocopier toner and the faint ozone of failing circuitry. Lieutenant Bowie unlocked the wire mesh cage that protected the rack from casual tampering and motioned for the clerk to power Unit 3. A dull screen woke, framed by cobwebbed speakers. The clerk clicked into the date tree and pulled up May 3rd, 2 years earlier, 11:42 a.m., the hour the second mortgage had been notarized. Static chewed the first seconds, then a fisheye view of the notary's waiting room resolved scuffed linoleum, a drooping ceiling fan, and 2 figures at the desk. One was unmistakably the notary, Mr. Hua. The other wore a slate-gray suit and a wig cut into a blunt bob. Elena leaned closer. Even through pixelation, she recognized the tilt of her aunt's jaw, the slight asymmetry at the corner of the left eye, a childhood scar from a bicycle crash. The woman signed with sweeping decisiveness, then slid a driver's license across the counter. The camera caught only a flash of reflective laminate, but the name was typed in subtitle-sized letters beneath Tran Elena Marie. Elena inhaled, lungs sharpening like blades. The date stamp in the corner crawled 30 seconds forward. The woman accepted a blue stamp pad, pressed her thumb onto a deed, then dabbed a monogrammed handkerchief against the smudge, fastidious as a surgeon closing fascia. After a polite bow, she left the frame purse clutched, not a bead of sweat on her brow. Bowie rewound toggled enhancement digital lipstick on a corpse, but the evidence was crystalline enough. He exported the clip onto a thumb drive and held it out. Elena accepted, fingers tingling. "Chain of custody starts now," he said. "Your copy stays with me until court." She nodded, pocketing only the burn she felt under her breastbone, a sensation somewhere between rage and vindication. Upstairs, stained glass filtered noon into bruised panes across the hallway. She followed Bowie into a side office where the county clerk retrieved a dusty tape recorder from the vault. "Your father submitted this with last year's audit," the clerk explained, sliding a cassette into a refurbished deck. The speaker hissed, cleared, then filled the cramped room with her father's voice, quieter than she remembered, taut with worry. "Father Vin, we appreciate your help, counselor, but my sister..." She presses. "We told her the stipend had to stop, lawyer Ngok. You've supported her for nearly a decade. Why end it now? Father, Elena's medical tuition, the house On's treatments. It's too much. Fung must learn, lawyer. You fear retaliation." "Father, I fear she'll find another way to bleed us. She's clever, and family doesn't believe she's dangerous. I'm not sure how to protect my daughter's future if I can't trust my own blood. Can you draft contingencies?" Something ironclad. The tape clicked off. Elena stared at the recorder a long moment, throat constricting, until she tasted copper. Her father had foreseen betrayal and still failed to barricade against it. Worse, he'd tried to shield her and unwittingly handed her identity to the very danger he feared. "He died afraid for me," she whispered. No one answered. Back at Willow Crescent, afternoon, light slanted through high windows like golden guillotine blades. She laid the thumb drive and cassette on the study table beside spreadsheets, notarized deeds, and forensic tox reports. The montage of documentation formed a grotesque family album, Portrait of a Parasite. She brewed coffee strong enough to double as solvent. Steam curled above the mug, fogging the edges of her determination. For 15 minutes, she listened again to the notary clip, stop, rewind, frame, step, memorizing her aunt's every tell, the rhythmic tap of heels, the efficient sweep of a Mont Blanc pen, the almost imperceptible glance at the wall clock, as if running an internal stopwatch. Fung hadn't forged a signature. She'd embodied it. That took rehearsal arrogance and, more dangerously, patience. While the video looped, Elena opened a slim accordion folder buried at the bottom of a bronze filing cabinet. It was labeled Stipends 2011-2016. Inside lay money transfer receipts, Western Union carbon copies, and polite thank you notes from Australia written in her aunt's looping cursive, "Dearest An, gratitude for your relentless support. Business venture slow but promising. Warm regards, Fung." Each year the amounts grew 10 million dong 2040. The last note, dated a month before the tape recording, bore no thank you, only a terse request, advance next quarter early. Market unpredictable. Her mother had written back on floral stationery, "We can't chi. Elena begins residency costs high." Silence filled the chronology until 9 months later, the first fake withdrawal hit Elena's account. On another desk, she found a miniature whiteboard and drew 3 timelines: motives, methods, opportunities. Under motives, she listed lost stipend, envy of inheritance, fear of debt. Under methods, identity theft, slow poison staged accident. Under opportunities, frequent courier trips, familial trust, rural banking loopholes. She circled the intersection, Fung's need for control. Wind groaned against shutters, rattling them like skeletal applause. Elena glanced at the antique clock, 5:07 p.m., 33 hours since the funeral. She hadn't truly slept, only napped between revelations. But fatigue felt luxurious compared to impotence. She capped the marker with audible finality. Resolute, she dialed Min's number again. "Tell your editor you'll need front-page clearance," she said. "I'm giving you the spine of the story." He whistled low. "Ready your whistle, Doc. The monster's under your bed." "Not for long," she answered. They arranged a meeting for dawn at Min's favorite bunker, a half-abandoned warehouse lit by strings of bare Edison bulbs where he collated exposés safe from casual surveillance. Elena spent the evening organizing evidence into color-coded binders. Each binder spine carried a single letter. Together they spelled "end a game," her subconscious pun she noticed only at midnight and allowed herself one hollow smile. At 2 a.m., headlights crawled up the driveway. A black sedan, government plates. No siren. Elena moved to the foyer, fingers tight on the iron poker, the same improvised weapon that had once comforted her during teenage insomnia. Bowie exited the car, trench coat flaring. "You didn't answer your phone," he said. She realized her battery lay dead beside the coffee pot. He brought news forensic accountants traced Sapphire Wellness to a shell firm, shareholders anonymous, but shipping manifests bore Fong's handwriting. Customs agents seized 2 pallets of herbal relaxant at the port. Initial tests indicated thallium levels high enough to fell a horse. "Your aunt scaled production," he said, disgust shading his voice. She wasn't just murdering, she was manufacturing. Elena's chest tightened with fresh horror, but behind it burned a strange clarity. Every new crime made prosecution simpler. We have video, audio, financial trails, customs violations, attempted homicide. "What's missing?" she asked. "Confession," Bowie replied. "I'll get it," she said, surprising both of them. Morning seeped into the sky, painting the lake pewter. Elena drove to the warehouse where Min greeted her, armed with pastries and a conspiratorial grin. "Bad news or good news first?" he asked. "Bad. Your aunt's attorney filed an injunction to freeze the investigation, citing emotional distress." "Expected." "Good. We found an email thread between Fung and a venture capitalist in Singapore. She promised a patentable neuroproprietary tincture, profits projected at 7 figures. She offered real estate collateral, your house." Elena sipped burnt coffee, mentally notarizing the outrage. She leveraged poison as product and my identity as collateral. She shook her head, almost awed. How many crimes can one woman stack before breakfast? Min opened a laptop to a pause frame from the notary tape and zoomed on a minor detail Elena had missed. A blue enamel pin on her aunt's lapel, 2 interlocking dragons. Min clicked to another image, a social media photo of Fung at a fundraiser, same pin. "Charity for rare neurological diseases," he explained. "Front company." "Which means donors' mailing lists. Paper trails." "Enough for conspiracy charges," Elena finished. Min raised his coffee in salute. "You read my mind, doctor." They built a war room of evidence prints pinned to corkboard yarn lines post-its. Under the pallid warehouse bulbs it looked melodramatic, but the pattern emerging was cold math. Cash flow arrows led from Elena's paycheck to shell accounts to chemical purchases to marketing budgets, all orbiting Fong like petals around a toxic bloom. At 11 a.m., Elena and Min marched into Cedrus and Bay Legal, a marble-floored fortress where her aunt's counsel worked. They requested a deposition for civil discovery. The receptionist froze when Min flashed press credentials. Within minutes, a junior associate ushered them into a glass cube. Elena placed a single folder on the table. Surveillance, forgeries, toxicology, international customs, she listed. We file in 48 hours unless Ms. Nguyen Phuong sits down for a recorded statement. The associate stammered about privilege and due process. Min slid across a disc. And here's the clip of your client committing felony fraud on camera. Feel free to scrub her wig details frame by frame. The associate's face drained to porcelain. He excused himself to consult senior counsel. Outside, sunlight glared off skyscraper glass. Min exhaled. We just punched the shark right in the nose. Elena buttoned her coat. Shark bled first. They split Min to draft an embargoed feature Elena to police headquarters. There she submitted every artifact under sworn affidavit. Detectives photographed the M. de Game binders, logged them into evidence. The senior prosecutor met her in a corridor, smelling of copy paper and stale instant noodles. Ms. Tran, if half of this holds, we're looking at premeditated double homicide, grand larceny, wire fraud, and trafficking in controlled substances. Elena nodded, heartbeat steady for the first time in days. All of it will hold, she said. Late afternoon found her back at Willow Crescent. Sunset fractured through beveled glass, casting bloody tessellations on the floor. The house had grown quieter, as if dismantling a curse with each notarized lie peeled away. She climbed to the attic, a place she'd avoided too many cobwebbed trunks, too much potential heartbreak. But she needed one final piece proof of motive. She lifted lids, rifled through mildew-sweet photo albums. In a cedar box, she found stacks of unsent postcards, Bondi Beach, Sydney Opera House, Great Barrier Reef, each scrawled with variations of "Wish You Were Here." Send more soon, under signatures that twisted desperation into cursive. She found remittance slips marked urgent loan statements bearing the red stamp of default and a single journal in Phuong's angular hand. Pages recounted her unrewarded sacrifice for family bitterness ripening into entitlement. The last entry 8 months ago seethed, "They'll cut me off, I built their fortune. Elena will pay one way or another." The line ended with a gouged pen stroke. Elena photographed every page. The handwriting trembled with volatility, more confession than diary. She locked the attic, slid the journal into an evidence bag, and felt the house exhale. That night, phone lights blinked like tiny lighthouses across her desk. Min texted law firm folded. Phuong's deposition tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring handcuffs. Lieutenant Bowie messaged search warrant approved for Sydney storage unit. The prosecutor emailed need your testimony outline ASAP. Jury pool selected next week. Elena answered each with calm brevity. Then she opened her father's taped plea on repeat. His voice, fragile yet firm, reminded her why the onslaught mattered, protecting futures even posthumously. She promised him aloud, "They'll believe you." Outside fog rolled off the lake like cautious applause. The mansion's silhouette stood stolid against moonlight, but something inside had shifted irrevocably. This was no longer a crypt of secrets, but the staging ground of reckoning. In the study, she cleared everything except a single sheet of stationery. She wrote 6 words in neat block letters, "I refuse to be your asset." She addressed it to her aunt, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it next to the chess set on the mantel. White queen toppled, black king cornered, checkmate inevitable. She turned off the lights, descended the staircase, and stepped into night air wet with pine resin and possibility. Somewhere across town, Phuong's legal defense scrambled to cauterize a hemorrhaging alibi. Somewhere in Sydney, customs agents snapped photos of mislabeled tonics. Threads tightened, nets closed. Elena felt none of the giddy triumph thrillers promised. Only the solid, almost medicinal certainty that truth once set in motion accelerates. She locked the mansion door, slid the iron key into her pocket beside the thumb drive, sealed evidence, sealed fate, and walked toward her car. With each step, gravel crunched like miniature verdicts. Headlights flared, engine rumbled. She eased onto the road, taillights glimmering red across mist-slick asphalt. Behind her, the house remained stripped of illusions, waiting like an honest witness. Ahead, the road curved toward dawn courtrooms and consequences. Elena pressed the accelerator, voice steady in the quiet cabin endgame. The word tasted neither bitter nor sweet, just true. The mansion's silhouette dissolved into the hillside like a rumor, its stone facade a quiver beneath shifting layers of coastal mist. Midnight had slipped past, but Elena kept her watch set to 42:01, exactly every second after that belonged to ambush. She crouched beneath a mezzanine window, sliding a palm-sized camera beneath the eave. The lens blinked once, then settled into infrared pulse. Across the foyer, another camera already watched the front hall. In the library, a discreet pinhole unit faced the walnut desk where evidence waited like a sleeping viper. None of the devices were state-of-the-art. Min had borrowed them from a freelancer friend who covered wildlife rescues, but their night vision sensors worked down to a single lumen. Tonight, single lumens might save her life. Min knelt nearby laptop, balanced on his thighs, coaxing the 4 camera feeds into a split-screen grid. Green tones flickered across his face, painting him with noir shadows. "Signal's clean," he whispered. "I routed through a prepaid hotspot. If she's running cell sniffer gear, she'll find a bakery network down the road." A bead of sweat slid from his temple. He hadn't slept since the courthouse tape. Elena handed him a thermos. Coffee steamed into the damp corridor, but neither drank. They retreated to a servant's stairwell that overlooked the foyer through a half-closed lattice. From there, they could watch both the study door and the front entrance without being seen. Elena clicked off the hallway lights. Darkness folded over them like black velvet, punctured only by the faint LED glow on Min's trackpad. Minutes passed 3:05:11 until every creak of timber sounded suspicious. Elena's pulse rattled against her throat. She had performed thoracotomies under brighter fear, but there at least she had anesthesia and consent. Tonight she wielded only foresight and a 9-inch maglite that doubled as baton. The house breathed around them, radiator pipes contracting, window panes flexing in cold. Each sound arraigned her nerves. At 42:29, the security grid strobed white. Motion. Camera 2 library window registered a figure sliding through the French doors with the silent commitment of a burglar who had practiced the path to muscle memory. Even in infrared, the silhouette was unmistakable: petite frame, sharply tailored coat hair, pinned in the severe chignon Elena remembered from childhood weddings. Aunt Fung. Elena's stomach iced over. She tapped Min's knee. He zoomed. Fung paused by the walnut desk flashlight clipped to lapel. Instead of rummaging through random drawers, she moved with surgical precision. Second drawer left for a manila envelope, third shelf north wall for a black hard drive, top drawer for a passport sleeve. Each item disappeared into a waterproof satchel that bulged like a pregnant threat. She scanned the room once more as if listening for accusation. Then she killed the desk lamp and retreated toward the atrium. Elena Min breathed. "She's going for the evidence." Elena nodded. Her jaw felt wired shut. She unholstered the maglite, checked the stun gun setting on the switch. They had rehearsed this follow-record intercept outside Never Corner inside a house with blind corridors. She motioned 3 count, then eased the stairwell door ajar. Floorboards in the mezzanine groaned. Fung froze, head tilting like a predator hearing grass rustle. Elena held breath. Min's watch beeped 1/4 past the hour. In the hush, it sounded like artillery. Fung pivoted and sprinted. Elena cursed, vaulted the last 5 steps, boots slamming mosaic tile. Overhead light burst to life. Min had triggered the foyer switch, bathing the ground floor in mercury glare. Fung reached the side vestibule, yanked open a stained glass panel, and leapt over the sill with physics-defying grace. Elena followed, lungs knifed by cold. Outside, fog smothered the property, thick as plaster dust. Flashlight beams sliced useless tunnels through the milk. Gravel crunched somewhere right. She pivoted, almost slipped on algae-slick stone. Min emerged behind her breath, a ragged engine. South path, he rasped, and bolted toward the ornamental gate that led to the lake. Elena gave chase. Branches whipped at her sleeves, dew slicked her hairline. Through the fog, she glimpsed Fung's coat hem flaring like a raven's wing. The path narrowed to a boardwalk skirting the water. Here, mist rose off the lake in swirling curtains, swallowing depth perception. Footfalls thudded on wet timber. Somewhere ahead, a flashlight beam danced, then vanished. Elena slowed, heart pounding inside skullbone, listening for splash or creak. Instead, a muffled grunt, then a body hit planks hard. She lunged forward. Min lay on his side glasses, skewed palms scraped. Above him, Fung brandished a telescoping baton. Elena's rage detonated. She swung her maglite. Fung parried with the baton. Metal rang like a tuning fork. The satchel swung from her shoulder zipper, half open inside. Elena glimpsed the black hard drive glinting. Min staggered upright, pulled a second camera from his pocket and aimed. Fung hissed, jabbed his rib, then bolted down the boardwalk toward the boathouse. Elena sprinted after souls, slapping puddles, lungs branding icy knives into tissue. Twice she nearly slid into dark water. Once she snagged a splinter thick as a nail into her palm. But adrenaline sluiced pain. They reached the boathouse pier. Fung unhitched a skiff, shoved it off the mooring with practiced leverage. The hull caught current, gliding into haze. Without thinking, Elena jumped from pier to deck, knees jarring. The boat rocked. Freezing spray needled her face. For a heartbeat, both women wavered, balancing. Then Fung whipped the baton. Elena blocked with flashlight sparks of pain up forearm. The satchel tumbled, contents skittering, envelopes fanning across deck, 2 USB sticks, the passport sleeve, and the black drive. Elena dove, grabbed a USB, slid it inside her boot. Fung seized her collar nails, digging. Boat lurched, both pitched sideways. Elena's shoulder smacked, gunnel stars flashed behind eyes. Somewhere behind Min shouted her name, voice swallowed by fog. The baton arced downward. Elena twisted. It smashed planks where her skull had been. She kicked out blindly. Heel connected with shin. Fung yelped, stumbled, but caught rigging. Elena leveraged momentum, lunged, palm-heeled the satchel further aft. It skimmed deck, then slid under a bench. She elbowed free, scrambled toward bow. Water slapped sides in metronome beats. Fung recovered, advanced. Her breath puffed, white eyes feral. "Everything burns tonight," she snarled, first word since the chase started. Elena spat blood salt. "Not if truth floats first," she faked. Right ducked baton, shoulder checked her aunt into the mast. The aluminum pole reverberated. Fung reeled, but grabbed a mooring rope, using it to swing arc-like toward the hard drive. Elena lunged to intercept, but slick deck betrayed. She skidded, knees shredding fabric. Fung's hand closed on the drive. Elena grabbed her wrist. Muscles corded, both straining. Freezing condensation turned their grip treacherous. For seconds they seesawed over evidence dense enough to jail a dynasty. Then footsteps. Min leapt aboard, wielding a boat hook. "Drop it," he barked. Fung's gaze flicked, calculus firing. She released drive, only to backhand Min with baton. He staggered, slipped, crashed through a coil of rope, and toppled into the lake. Elena's scream choked by wind. Her aunt pivoted, baton poised. But Elena no longer cared about flesh wounds. She dove after Min, instinctively, medical reflex older than vendetta. Water hit like electrified glass. Cold sucked air from lungs. She surfaced, scanning in ragged circles. There a thrashing arm. She surged forward, snagged his jacket lapel, kicked toward pier light, barely visible. Boardwalk posts loomed. She grabbed a rung-hauled Min until he gripped plank edge. Muscles quivered. Breath felt like inhaling razors. Overhead wood creaked. Fung sprinted down pier toward shore, satchel clutched again, but the hard drive lay abandoned on deck. Chest heaving. Elena hoisted Min onto boards, then collapsed beside him. USB, he wheezed. She tapped her boot. "Got at least one." He coughed, lake water. "Drive." She pointed to boat. "Still there." He nodded, eyes tearing from cold. Sirens faint in distance, buoys backup closing. Elena forced herself upright, gripped boat rail, retrieved the hard drive. Fingers numb, she secured it inside coat pocket. Headlights bloomed through trees as patrol cars bounced down narrow lane. Blue strobes fractured fog into shards. Fung's silhouette vanished among cedars. Officers sprinted past, shouting commands. Elena sank onto pier pane, catching up bruised ribs, shredded knees, throbbing knuckles. Min sat beside her, trembling uncontrollably, but laughter shook his chest. "We look like hell," he rasped. She laughed too, a sound half-sob. "Hell looks worse." She removed the USB from boot, held it between them. "Bank transfers, shell companies hope waterproof casings work." Min nodded. A flashlight beam approached. Lieutenant Bowie knelt, eyes assessing injuries. "Ambulance 2 minutes," he said. Elena shook head. "Data first." She pressed drive and USB into his gloved hands. Chain of custody. He pocketed them, gently clasped her forearm. "You did good, Buxy." Only then did she acknowledge the tremor in her spine, not the chill, but fear fully formed. She had thrown herself into dark water, face down, the architect of her family's ruin, and almost lost more than evidence. For the first time since this nightmare began, real terror seeped through adrenaline's damn terror of what could still be taken. But over Lieutenant Bowie's shoulder, she watched officers fan out radios, crackling coordinates. Backup rippled across shoreline. Flashlights scanned underbrush. The mansion's distant windows glowed crimson blue with police strobes. Evidence was secure. Min was alive. Her aunt was now prey, not predator. Elena drew a breath so cold it burned, then exhaled a vow she hadn't known she was forming. "I will finish this, no matter how thick the fog." The lake answered only with ripples that glittered under emergency lights, but something in the water's relentless lapping sounded like agreement. She squeezed Min's shoulder, wordless solidarity, then let paramedics guide them up the pier toward blankets, cuffs clicking in distance, and a dawn she intended to reach standing. The prosecutor's office was a brutalist block of gray concrete and fluorescent fatigue, but at 49 minutes past 1 in the morning, it felt like the only place in the province still pumping oxygen. Elena stood beneath a buzzing ceiling lamp, parka sleeves crusted with lake spray salt, while a clerk slid a thick manila packet through the bulletproof window. Inside were the two complaints that would change everything: criminal petition for attempted murder and civil action for fraudulent conveyance of assets. Each was longer than a novella and heavier than a confession. She initialed every margin, signed every signature line with the hooked flourish only she could produce, then passed her pen through the slot as though surrendering a weapon. The clerk stamped both packets, the ink bleeding a small cloud that read, "Filed 0312. For the first time since her parents' accident, Elena felt the calendar tilt in her favor. When she emerged, dawn was still a rumor, but reporters were already loitering outside, frosted breath curling around camera lenses. Their headlights carved pale canyons through the mist, reflecting off soggy asphalt. One microphone lunged toward her like an eager insect. "Dr. Tran, is it true your own aunt attempted to poison your parents?" She lifted her chin but kept walking. Another shouted, "Will you testify at the probate rehearing?" She slid into Min's idling hatchback and slammed the door. Journalists bashed questions against the windows, but the car pulled away, tires hissing on rain-soaked streets. Inside, exhaustion swallowed language. Elena leaned back, eyelids fluttering, but adrenaline kept her from slipping under. Min's face glowed blue in dashboard light as he scrolled the clerk's digital receipt on his phone. "Your filing's already trending," he muttered. Hashtag Hatch Inheritance Assassin. She closed her eyes. Hashtags cheapened grief, but exposure served strategy. "Let them speculate," she whispered. "The more sunlight, the less room she has to hide." 3 hours later, Court Administrator Lei Herbun, as austere as her temperament, called to confirm a special session of probate would convene in 72 hours emergency docket because the integrity of the original will had been substantially challenged. Translation: the state wanted a front-row seat to a potential double murder plus financial scandal, preferably before the public turned on them for perceived inertia. And yes, Administrator Lei continued, press credentials would be granted. Elena hung up, pulse thrumming like surgical suction. She trudged into the mansion's library the way soldiers re-enter cities they've already shelled, eyes open for ambush, even among rubble. Cameras still perched under cornices, their red diodes blinking slow Morse. A police tech would collect them later, but right now she needed their footage. She wanted every frame of her aunt stealing evidence broadcast on a courtroom projector 72 hours from now. She downloaded the recordings to an encrypted drive, then set her laptop upon the massive dining table, which she had cleared except for 6 sheets of poster board. The last time she'd used poster board was med school pharmacology review color-coding antidotes for obscure toxins. Tonight, she wrote a single word in thick crimson marker across the top of the first sheet: severance. Below, she drew a vertical column of boxes, each labeled with brutal clarity. 1. Freeze remaining joint accounts. Completed 0445. 2. Revoke all powers of attorney. Notarized awaiting county stamp. 3. Order full bank statement histories. In progress, ETA 24H. 4. Secure digital evidence. USB plus HDD. Logged with chain of custody tags. 5. Notify international banks. Bangkok, Brisbane. Draft letters. Legal translation needed. 6. Issue press statement. Outline ready release. T48H. 7. Prepare personal impact. Affidavit. Draft by forensic psychologist tonight. 8. Catalog. Physical assets for injunction. Photograph antiques. Safe deposit jewelry. Each item received a sticky note for subtasks. When the board filled, she started a second and a third until red marker fumes ghosted across the library's stale air. Min returned, carrying takeout banh mi and energy drinks. He glanced at the growing war mural. "Looks like you're prepping heart-lung bypass for the whole financial system." "Close," she replied, chewing a bite of chili paste. "I'm severing every vein she ever tapped." They worked in tag-team silence. Min Ghost wrote a concise but lethal press release. Dr. Elena Tran, sole beneficiary of the Fung estate, seeks justice for her parents' poisoning and the systematic theft of her identity. Evidence indicates an intricate fraud scheme spearheaded by a maternal relative. He left the relative nameless. Bait tasted sweeter when a predator imagined anonymity. Elena drafted subpoenas for telecommunications logs, courier records, and an emergency order compelling Sapphire Wellness Ltd. To reveal its shareholder registry. At dawn, she pinged an ex-classmate now working in toxicology at the Pasteur Institute, requested an independent validation of the thallium samples. The friend responded with a yawning selfie and a thumbs up. Sleep came nowhere near the mansion. Elena poured black coffee and burned through tasks until circles formed under her eyes like lunar eclipses. By 2 in the afternoon, 2 detectives arrived to install extra motion detectors. They looked startled by the poster boards. Expecting a coup, one joked. Already happened, she answered, handing him a list of blind spots she'd found on the property's perimeter. That evening, she sat at the library desk with her father's fountain pen and drafted one final letter. The envelope was cream the ink, a deep oxblood. To Aunt Fung, the court will reconvene in 3 days at 10 hours. Your presence is requested to clarify matters of inheritance, fiduciary duty, and attempted homicide. Consider this the concluding chapter of our family ledger. After this day, no debt, emotional or financial, remains outstanding. This is the last reading of the will. Elena. She sealed the envelope with red wax, pressing the stamp her father used on Lunar New Year. A tiny compass rose an emblem of direction. Min hand-delivered the letter to the detention facility where Fung, recently captured after an interstate roadblock, awaited arraignment. He returned later with a copy of the intake log. She saw her aunt's signature, angrier, shakier, now acknowledging receipt. In the small hours, Elena's phone pinged. The judge had approved expedited asset freeze motions. Every account bearing her name was now locked behind judicial encrypt. If Fung's accomplices tried to siphon another dong, a forensic auditor would receive an automatic ping. Still, Elena couldn't allow margin for sabotage. She opened her laptop, created a new spreadsheet titled Final Disbursements. One by one, she mapped exit strategies for every resource. Once entangled with her aunt's schemes, the mansion would be placed in a charitable remainder trust. The business credit line would be shuttered. Proceeds from assets seized abroad would seed the rural health initiative she'd envisioned. She marked each cell with a color code: green for charitable funds, blue for legal escrow, yellow for personal restitution. The process felt like rebuilding vasculature after excising malignant tissue. At 4 in the morning, a courier delivered bound copies of the civil suit glossy navy covers embossed in silver. Elena thumbed through them, feeling the weight of litigation settle into her knuckles. Count 1, alleged fraudulent misrepresentation. Count 2, constructive trust. Count 3, unjust enrichment. The footnotes referenced everything from outdated mortgage statutes to international shipping treaties. Reading them felt like peering at x-rays of her own skeleton, painful, but undeniably her. She took the first copy, wrote Exhibit A, the cost of blood, on the flyleaf and slid it into her suitcase. It would travel with her to court, an anatomical proof of betrayal. By sunrise, sparrows fluttered across the stained glass windows. The mansion's antique clock chimed 6, its gears grated like old bones adjusting. Elena stood before the poster boards one last time, red marker in hand, and ticked the final checkboxes. Every item: freeze, revoke, subpoena, file, publish had either been completed or scheduled. Under the last board, she drew a horizontal line and wrote, "When family becomes fraud, clean the wound down to bone." She showered, donned a charcoal suit, knotted her mother's pearl necklace at the throat. Not sentiment strategy, cameras would zoom and pearls refract strong light better than diamonds. In the hallway mirror, she looked like a surgeon midnight page to court. She straightened cuffs, felt the USB tucked in her pocket, a duplicate of the bank transfer evidence. Another copy sat in a safe deposit box across town. A third was scheduled to upload to a public blockchain if she failed to log in by hearing time. Redundancy was her new religion. Min met her in the foyer, dark circles under his eyes, but grin intact. "Press releases live," he said. "Every news desk from Hanoi to Hobart wants comment." She locked the front door behind them. "Let them camp outside the courthouse," she replied. "They'll get their headlines soon." 72 hours later, the courthouse plaza resembled a film premiere. Satellite vans jammed curbs. Reporters rehearsed stand-ups under LED panels. Curious locals craned necks behind barricades. A police corridor guided Elena through clattering shutters and shouted questions. She carried only a slim laptop bag inside the severance spreadsheet and one leather-bound copy of the civil complaint. In the grand marble atrium, Administrator Lay greeted her with a curt nod, indicated courtroom 3. Through oak doors, Elena saw rows of polished benches now occupied by journalists, law clerks, and a scattering of townspeople. At the plaintiff's table, prosecutor, and adjusted glasses gesturing at a mound of exhibits. He signaled thumbs up, audio, video, forensic reports, all in triplicate. The bailiff's call cut through chatter. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Vaugh." The room stood hushed, descending like dust. Judge Vaugh, a small woman with ferocious eyebrows, surveyed the gallery over gold-rimmed lenses. "This rehearing shall determine the validity of the late Fung estate's distribution and address allegations of criminal fraud," she announced. Two guards ushered Fung in from a side door. She wore the same charcoal trench, now wrinkled and shorn of its imperious aura. Her wrists cuffed glinted beneath fluorescent light, yet her chin remained elevated, eyes scanning the gallery until they met Elena's. In them flared a lightning fork of rage and something colder, calculation. Elena offered no expression, only unfolded the severance spreadsheet on counsel table. Its columns of frozen assets, revoked proxies, and forensic cross-references stared back like a system in terminal shutdown. Each cell testified access denied. As the judge reviewed initial motions, Prosecutor Anne whispered, "Ready." Elena inhaled, tasting granite-cooled air. "Ready." Administrator Lei announced exhibit numbers. Screens flickered to life. First the notary Cam Fung forging Elena's signature. Gasps rippled across benches. Next, the toxicology slide thallium distributions glowing red. Finally, a chart of bank transfers, arrows bleeding from Elena's wages into shell accounts. The narrative unfolded with mathematic chill. When the video of Fung's midnight break-in played, captured by Elena's improvised wildlife cams, the room fell into a hush so thick even camera shutters stuttered. The footage ended on a freeze-frame Fung's face-mouth set hand burrowing into the satchel of stolen evidence. Judge Vaugh cleared her throat. "Ms. Nguyen Fung, counsel may address the court." Fung's attorney, a pallid man who looked recently shell-shocked, stood attempted an objection about chain of custody. The judge overruled. Chain was pristine. Elena glanced at her severance board notes, each action like a cauterized vessel. She felt no triumph, only the electric stillness of incision complete, bleeding controlled. She turned toward Fung, met her aunt's eyes, and mouthed a single silent sentence. "This is the last cut." Across the aisle, cameras clicked like distant hail, freezing that unspoken verdict in pixels and memory. In that flash, Elena sensed the ledger of family debts finally closing, sealed not by forgiveness, but by forensic ink and judicial gravity. Whatever chapters remained would be written in her own unborrowed hand, free of forged signatures, free of poison, drifting through pastry, free of shadows masquerading as kin. And at the plaintiff's table, beneath the harsh fluorescence of public reckoning, she allowed herself at last a single steady breath, the first that belonged only to her. The courthouse felt colder than usual that morning, though it was likely just Elena's perception, heightened, sharpened by a sleepless night and the weight of years she never asked to carry. She sat in the front row of the courtroom, a navy blouse pressed neatly, hair tied back, no jewelry. Her hands were calm on her lap, but her eyes flicked toward the doors every few seconds, waiting. The room was packed. Curious neighbors, retired couples from around the lake, the occasional reporter holding voice recorders at their knees, all seated on wooden benches, whispering behind cupped hands. They hadn't seen a scandal this delicious in decades, a mysterious death, an inheritance dispute, and a once respected woman now wrapped in suspicion. The bailiff called for quiet just as the double doors swung open. Ba Feng stepped through like a stage actress, arriving late to her cue, draped in charcoal gray dark sunglasses perched on the bridge of her nose despite the cloudy interior. A younger man trailed behind her, lean with a legal pad and an expression too smug for someone who hadn't read the police report yet. Elena didn't flinch. She only tilted her chin up and watched her aunt take her seat at the opposing table. The judge, a broad-shouldered woman with tired eyes, entered promptly and wasted no time. "This is a continuation of the reading and execution of the estate of Mr. and Mrs. Tran. Due to contestation, today's session will allow evidentiary presentation." "Your Honor," Elena began, standing smoothly, "I'd like to submit multiple exhibits for consideration. These documents and files demonstrate fraudulent activity under my name related directly to the property and assets in question." Her voice didn't waver, not once. She handed a thick folder to the clerk. Inside, notarized signatures, one real, several expertly forged. Transaction logs showing siphoned funds from her private accounts into dummy corporations. A toxicology report confirming the presence of thallium in her parents' bloodstream. And finally, an external hard drive. "I also have video footage," she said, "taken from a security camera in the study of the Tran family home. It shows the defendant entering the premises uninvited at 2:13 a.m., attempting to remove evidence." The courtroom stirred. Judge Lee adjusted her glasses. "Play it." The monitor flickered. Grainy black and white images filled the screen. Ba Feng's figure crept into view, flashlight beam bouncing across shelves. She rifled through drawers, paused to read documents, then slid something silver into her purse, a portable drive. At one point, she turned just enough for the light to catch her face. Gasps echoed. One man muttered chua-oi under his breath. Another woman covered her mouth. Fung remained still, her jaw-clenched lips tight. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper, but she waved him off with a small shake of her head. Elena continued. I also have a recording, she said, retrieving a small device from her folder. This is a conversation between my father and his attorney. It took place 4 months before their deaths. The judge nodded. Elena pressed play. I don't know who to trust anymore. Her father's voice crackled. Even Fung. Especially Fung. She's been asking about the deed again. Wants to help manage the estate. I'm pulling back. No more transfers. I don't care if it upsets her. I have to protect Elena. The silence afterward was thick and unmoving. The judge took a breath. Defense. Fung's lawyer stood. Your Honor. This is all circumstantial. Yes, Ms. Tran's name is on some documents, but that doesn't prove. She forged my signature, Elena interrupted. On 3 separate loans. She diverted over 800 million dong from my accounts. She poisoned my parents and tried to erase me financially and legally. Judge Lee lifted a hand. You'll get your full statement, Ms. Tran. But it was too late. The crowd was murmuring again. The weight of the evidence wasn't speculative anymore. It was real, tangible, documented. Fung stood slowly. Her voice when it came was rasped and defensive. I did what I had to do. They were going to leave everything to her. After everything I sacrificed, they died, Elena said quietly, and you used it as an opportunity. Fung took a step forward. A mistake. The bailiff moved fast, intercepting her before she reached the divider between audience and council tables. I'm done, Fung hissed, trying to shove past. This isn't justice, this is betrayal. No, Elena replied, voice calm, almost cold. What you did was betrayal. This is consequence. The judge banged the gavel once sharp and commanding. Order! Ms. Fung Trun, due to the overwhelming documentation, recorded confession and security footage provided, you are hereby remanded into custody pending full criminal investigation and civil proceedings. 2 officers approached. Fung jerked once, trying to twist away. You'll regret this, Elena. I already have, she said, eyes locked forward, for years. As they cuffed her, the room fell into stillness. Then came the sound, soft at first, a single clap. Then another. It grew. Dozens of hands applauding, not loud or mocking, but supportive. For truth, for courage, for a woman who had been exploited in silence and chose to rise. But Elena didn't bask in it. She didn't even move. A single tear slid down her cheek, silent clean. Not for sorrow, not for Fong. It was for her parents. For the years she'd worked double shifts to pay off debts that weren't hers. For every holiday missed while her aunt shopped with stolen money. For every dinner she ate alone while someone else spent her future. The applause faded. Elena sat down slowly, her hands back in her lap. She didn't look at the cameras, didn't give a statement to the reporters. She simply turned to Judge Lei and said, Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further remarks. The judge nodded, impressed but composed. Court is adjourned. The first headline arrived before dawn, pinging Elena's phone in seismic bursts she felt instead of heard. She had silenced every notification, but still sensed the vibration like a living thing in her coat pocket. Young doctor exposes family financial crimes after parents' mysterious deaths. The Saigon Herald crowed its banner superimposed over a screen grab of Elena stepping through the courthouse doors, pearl necklace visible above a charcoal lapel. Within minutes, other outlets echoed, each amplifying the story's more cinematic angles: orphaned physician, killer, inheritance, toxic betrayal. Cable pundits speculated about thallium as if auditioning for a forensic drama. Lifestyle bloggers gushed over Elena's understated courtroom attire. Finance podcasts dissected the shell company flowcharts as cautionary tales about blind trust. The sudden public fascination spun around her like carnival mirrors, all reflection. No intimacy, yet none of it surprised her. She had opened the door to light. Now she had to endure the glare. By mid-morning, she sat in a corner booth of the lakeside diner where she used to split rice porridge with her father after sunrise fishing trips. The vinyl seats cracked beneath her weight. The formica smelled of coffee grounds and nostalgia. She sipped weak tea, scanning a stack of legal emails on her tablet. Offers flooded in, interview requests, speaking engagements, even a publisher dangling a memoir contract. She archived each with clinical indifference. One headline, though, snagged her breath: From Victim to Vindicator, Dr. Tran's Road to Reclamation. The phrase road to reclamation made her chest tighten, accurate, but incomplete. Reclaiming wasn't enough. She wanted to redirect. The bell over the doorway jingled. Realtor Lin Chow's sleek pantsuit brisk handshake slid into the booth phone, already alight with market comparables. Elena had called her the night before with a single sentence, "I'm ready to list the property." Lynn wasted no time. Pre-war mansions on lake frontage rarely hit the market. She began fixating on square footage UNESCO-style molding potential for boutique hotel conversion. Elena listened, nodding, committing nothing beyond necessary. Monetary numbers floated between them like neutral atoms. 8 figures on a whiteboard meant little compared to the human currency already spent. They toured Willow Crescent one last time, Lynn dictating notes into her phone. Original Carrara marble, salvageable cedar beams, auction within 30 days. The realtor's excitement echoed through empty halls, but Elena heard only footfalls, the echo of arguments her parents never had the chance to finish, the hush of secrets finally unmasked. In the gold-leafed vestibule, she paused long enough to press her palm to the cool plaster. The walls stripped of portraits felt lighter, almost grateful to let go of their burden. She whispered, "Thank you for surviving," and moved on. That afternoon, she met Min and Lieutenant Bowie at the community center to finalize the foundation charter. The provincial governor's office had fast-tracked nonprofit status once Elena pledged the bulk of the sales proceeds toward rural medical outreach. They sat at a battered folding table, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the scent of instant noodles wafting from some distant corridor, while a notary public stamped each page. The organization would be called the Phung Tran Rural Health Trust, a compromise between honoring her parents and acknowledging the complicated lineage that produced her. Mission statement: deliver preventative care diagnostics and poison control education to underserved farming regions. She insisted thallium awareness be a named priority. Bowie raised an eyebrow but nodded with grave approval. When the ink dried, Elena passed Min a flash drive containing the trust's founding documents, budgets, and a one-page press release she had crafted herself. No hyperbole, she instructed. Just facts. Min Ever, the journalist, smiled wryly. Facts are the brightest spotlight anyway. He promised embargo until the listing date, then fist-bumped her in an unscripted burst of camaraderie that nearly broke her composure. That evening, alone in the mansion's study, she gathered stationery her father had imported from Kyoto, a soft ivory rag cotton that took fountain pen ink without bleed. The desk lamp painted a warm orb over the blank page. She dated the letter with deliberate slowness, 10 November, though the calendar had slipped beyond her notice. Then she began, "Bowie, I never imagined writing to you after all the words we exchanged and all the words we never had time to share. You told me once a good life is measured by how much love you leave behind, not by how much inheritance you pass forward. I have lived by that compass these last weeks, though the path looked like a battlefield. You also taught me to stitch wounds first on orange peels, then on human flesh. Today I am stitching our family back together, but into a shape that will not cut anymore. The house you protected will become medicine for strangers. The money they stole will become vaccines, X-ray film, long-distance ambulances. I am not martyring myself. I am redirecting injustice into infrastructure. That is the surgery you prepared me for, though neither of us could name it then. I have lived as you asked, steady, diligent. But now I must live another line you tucked into a bedtime story when I was 5. A compass is pointless if you never walk. So I am walking toward my own sunrise. Thank you for every star you fixed into my sky. Con gái của ba, Elena." She sealed the envelope, addressed it simply. For Ba, and tucked it into the oak mantle's secret drawer, the one where her father had hidden silly trinkets and long-expired lottery tickets. It would stay there for the next owner to find a silent reliquary. Packing took less time than she expected. She moved from room to room, evaluating objects with a triage eye: necessary, sentimental, replaceable. Necessary fit into a single rolling suitcase, medical certificates, a change of scrubs. Laptop, the fountain pen. Sentimental distilled into one shoebox: childhood photo where her mother braided her hair, the wristwatch her father received on his first day as a mechanical foreman, an origami crane her parents folded in matching pieces decades ago. Replaceable filled 4 donation boxes bound for the community shelter. Just after midnight, she dragged the suitcase to the foyer. The house creaked in its old language. She flicked off breakers, each clunk another farewell library, kitchen, parlor, master suite. Only the vestibule chandelier remained, casting stained glass fragments on polished floorboards. She stood under the colored light, closed her eyes, and breathed. The echo of that breath returned to her, softer, no longer heavy. A horn beeped outside. She wheeled the suitcase across the threshold. Min waited in the driver's seat, playlist of Vietnamese blues humming through the speakers. He raised 2 steaming cups of soy milk. Fuel for the road. "Where are we going?" she asked, sliding into the passenger seat. First the city. He said so you can sign the trust documents in front of the provincial registrar. After that, wherever your compass points. She watched the mansion recede in the side mirror until the fog swallowed it. The weight in her chest eased, not emptiness, not relief exactly, but a kind of equilibrium achieved when a bone finally knits. She sipped warm soy milk, sweetness lingered on her tongue like a lullaby. Highway 16 unspooled beneath the headlight stripes of reflective paint guiding them through darkness. Elena rested her forehead against the cool glass. Billboards blurred cell tower ads, political slogans, a funeral home promise of peaceful farewells. Her phone pinged again, but she ignored it. Tonight, digital noise could not compete with the steady pulse of asphalt. About 30 kilometers out, Min asked, "Do you regret selling it?" He didn't need to specify it. The mansion, the symbol, the grave. She thought for several kilometers. "No," she said finally. "Regret is for things undone. This is done. My parents never wanted monuments. They wanted impact." She glanced at the horizon where a faint ribbon of pale orange hinted at dawn. "Impact needs motion," she added half to herself. At a rest stop, she changed into Scrub's navy-knitted sweater layered on top. She met her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Hair-tousled eyes rimmed red but clear and saw no inheritor, no victim, no avenger. She saw a physician back on call carrying a lighter kind of burden. By sunrise, they reached the provincial capital's marble steps. A small gaggle of reporters hovered, but security kept them corralled behind velvet rope. Elena strode up the steps with Min 2 paces behind suitcase rattling softly. Inside, a clerk guided them to conference room C, an unadorned space of long tables and stale air. The registrar, an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses, greeted her with respectful nods and slid a thick binder forward. She signed the final page. Her signature landed firm, looped, unforged. "Your parents would be proud," the registrar said, voice low. "I hope the people we serve will be healthier," she replied. "That's pride enough." Outside microphones converged. "Dr. Tran, what's next?" one reporter shouted. Elena paused, suitcase handle in hand. She remembered the headline from Victim to Vindicator. No, she'd transcend even that label. She spoke calmly. "Next I go where the clinic goes. Villages 3 hours from the nearest hospital. Places nobody televises. Cameras flashed. Pens scribbled." She climbed into the passenger seat again. Min adjusted the rear view and grinned. "You played them like a pro." "I answered truthfully," she said. "I don't need more headlines. I need more syringes, more antibiotics, more public health nurses." They drove south along a ribbon of sunlit highway. Clouds parted, revealing a sky scrubbed clean by last week's storms. The world looked newly laundered. Elena cracked the window. Air carried the scent of wet rice patties and diesel. She realized her shoulders were no longer hunched. Mid-morning, they pulled into a roadside cafe. Elena unfolded the shoebox of sentimental items, removed her father's wristwatch, and strapped it onto her own pulse. It was 2 minutes slow. She wound it, aligning the second hand with an internal beat. She took out the origami crane, set it on the table, and smiled when a passing breeze lifted its wings, a small flight, but flight nonetheless. Min returned with Banbao set the plate down. He noticed the crane, flying somewhere, he teased. Everywhere, she answered, and meant it. They ate in companionable silence. A television mounted in the corner rolled B-roll footage from the hearing, lower third caption reading, "Willow Crescent Mansion, listed for sale, proceeds to medical charity." The cafe owner clapped when he recognized Elena. She nodded politely, offered no autograph. Back in the car, a silence settled deeper than the earlier quiet, peaceful but potent. Elena opened her tablet, drafting the first internal memo for the Rural Health Trust purchase refrigerated van, negotiate telemedicine partnership, develop traveling tox screening protocol. Action items multiplied like synapses firing fresh connections. Around noon, they reached Nguyen village, a cluster of stilt homes beside a winding canal. Children chased ducks along the berm. Elders squatted under tamarind trees playing Chinese chess. The local clinic was a single-room brick structure with peeling paint. Elena stepped out, introduced herself to the nurse on duty, and asked for a tour. The nurse, surprised but gracious, showed broken centrifuges, near-empty pharmacy shelves, and a cracked autoclave. Elena listened, took notes, promised supplies within 6 weeks. Outside, a boy tugged her sleeve, offered a lotus seed pod. She thanked him. Cracked a seed between teeth, tasting earthy sweetness that reminded her of childhood. She realized then that she had no return ticket, and the thought felt liberating rather than reckless. That evening, they checked into a modest guest house overlooking paddies flooded with sunset fire. Elena set her suitcase by the foot of the bed, unpacked only the essentials. She hung her scrubs on a wooden nail, placed the wristwatch on the sill, and opened the window to let in the drone of cicadas. In the distance, water buffalo lowed. Somewhere a karaoke machine crooned an old love ballad. She sat at the small desk and opened a fresh journal. On the first page, she wrote, Day 0. New baseline. Prescription 1 part, restitution 2 parts, service QD indefinitely. She closed the journal, exhaled slowly, and realized her chest no longer hurt. The burden was not gone, only transformed into momentum, like potential energy released down a slope. Outside, bats stitched the dusk with erratic flight paths, hunting invisible threads of insects. She watched them until the last orange faded from the sky. Just before bed, she slid the letter to her father from her pocket and reread the final line, This time I live for myself. She tucked it under the watch and turned off the lamp. In darkness, she listened to night sounds. Frogs, distant motorbikes, the rhythmic splash of irrigation pumps. Each note settled onto her like a blanket. Her stomach unclenched, her jaw relaxed. Sleep arrived on soft wings, and for the first time in months, she let it wash over her without resistance. Tomorrow would bring logistics, procurement calls, budgets, maybe more reporters, but tonight belonged to stillness, to the gentle hum of a world she finally felt part of again. In that half-dreaming state, she whispered a promise to her parents, to herself, to the strangers her foundation would one day heal. The debt is paid, the story rewritten, and the compass at last is mine to carry. With that vow settling like a heartbeat, Elena drifted into unburdened sleep. Suitcase half unpacked, soul entirely unpacked, the weight of a mansion replaced by the lightness of an open road. A brittle dawn cracked over the patties, turning every flooded terrace into a mirror the color of polished pewter. Somewhere, a rooster crowed once, twice, then fell silent, as if startled by its own insistence that a new day had arrived. Elena Tran woke before the second call, as she always did now, even without an alarm. She lay still on the narrow guest-house mattress and let the slow fan overhead blot out the last wisp of dream. It was her 36th birthday. 1 year ago to the hour, she'd stood on polished courthouse tile while the gavel came down on a lifetime of betrayal. 1 year since phone lines went quiet, since false debt stopped choking her inbox, since the mansion's sale deed pinned a coda to the saga. 1 year without manipulatively cheerful voicemails or surprise overdraft alerts or letters summoning her to fix disasters she hadn't caused. The hush felt almost un-Vietnamese. No bargaining voices, no thud of cleavers from the market, no radio static. She could taste how empty the air was, and she let that emptiness fill her lungs, expand her ribs, wash the last ache from muscles she'd run ragged. Sunlight crept between bamboo blinds, sketching bright rungs across the stucco wall. She rose, padded to the window, and unlatched the panes. The scene below looked both mundane and holy. A farmer leading a docile water buffalo along the dike, a grandmother sweeping fallen frangipani blossoms into faint pink piles. Elena closed her eyes and tasted the new morning damp earth cooking rice and the faint medicinal bitterness of herbs drying on a nearby rooftop. The odor reminded her of field clinics and promise. A gentle rap on the door broke the stillness. She opened it to find Ava standing there, cheeks flushed from the uphill walk, carrying a white bakery box tied with crimson string. Ava's dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun. A stray hibiscus petal clung to the elastic. "Happy birthday, Wanderer," she said, pushing the box into Elena's hands. 1 candle only, because the bakery insisted. Elena stepped aside, a warm laugh lazily climbing her throat. "You trekked all the way from Da Nang for a candle, not just any candle, vanilla bean soy. The woman swore it's vegan." Ava shrugged out of her windbreaker and kicked off sandals. "And I missed you." They settled at the small teak table by the window. Ava untied the string with the reverence of a midwife. Inside sat a single-layer sponge cake frosted pale lemon, the lone candle stuck dead center. Elena reached for a match, paused. "Light or leave unlit?" "Your call," Ava said. "I'm contractually obliged to respect all birthday protocols." Elena struck the match. The wick flared, throwing soft amber into the morning gray. No wish, no ritual countdown, just the hiss of flame steadying. Ava produced 2 forks and without ceremony carved a generous wedge. Icing smeared the box lid like a sunrise. They ate in companionable, quiet forks, scraping paper just enough to answer the distant cicadas. At the third bite, Elena realized she'd never tasted cake in silence before. There had always been crowds, arguments over who got the sugar roses, laughter thinly veiling expectations. This silence tasted sweet, not awkward. It tasted like oxygen. When half the cake was gone, Ava wiped icing from her lip with her thumb. "Clinic numbers came in," she said. 2,700 patients this quarter. Vaccination rate up 50%. No major pesticide poisonings in 3 months. Elena smiled into her tea. The mobile lab you crowdfunded makes the difference, she said. You plotted the routes Ava countered, and you found the medtech donors. I just nagged people on Instagram. Elena set down her cup. Funny how much good you can do once you stop hemorrhaging money into black holes. Ava's gaze softened. Funny how light you look, friend. Even your shadows are lighter. Elena's reply caught in her throat. She swallowed, nodded. Light. Yes. She'd measured that lightness in steps, one fewer bag at every move, one fewer emergency call centered on someone else's crisis, one extra hour of sleep devoid of phantom notifications. But she hadn't seen it until Ava said it aloud. She rose, crossed to the wooden desk, a rescued teacher's desk from the village school, its drawers warped by humidity. She slid open the shallow top drawer. Inside lay the personal remnants. She couldn't let herself forget the silver watch she now wore, her father's fountain pen, and a photograph she kept because a part of her refused to erase proof of what had been real. 4 faces in mismatched festival Audi hers, perched awkwardly at the edge, only her piece of the print had been crudely snipped out. The image that remained showed her parents smiling like they'd swallowed secrets, and Aunt Fung head angled just enough to dominate the composition. The space where Elena should have been looked like an open door to nowhere. She studied it one last time. The saturated lanterns overhead. The blur of fireworks in the distance. Fung's hand gripping her mother's shoulder, a grip that in retrospect looked less protective than possessive. These pixels belonged to a history she had already testified, already exhumed and buried anew. Ava spoke softly behind her. You still keep it? Elena traced the ragged edge with her thumb. Kept, she corrected. She walked to the small trash bin beside the desk, a bamboo cylinder lined with yesterday's tangerine peels, and dropped the photo in. It landed face up among the orange curls. She pressed the scrap down, turning it face first to the bottom. No flourish, no dramatic tear, just a letting go. Ava exhaled a breath she'd been holding for months. So that's that. That's that! Elena closed the drawer. They spent the remainder of the morning on clinic paperwork. Ava scanning purchase orders, Elena annotating grant proposals in efficient red strokes. At noon, they joined a village nutrition class under a tin roof where local mothers learned to fold banana leaves into improvised serving cups for vitamin-fortified porridge. Elena held a toddler on her hip so the mother could practice. The child tugged her stethoscope, cooing at its gleam. The weight of that tiny hand anchored her more firmly than any stanchion of marble had before. When the class ended, Ava hiked back to the guest house for fresh water. Elena lingered behind, stacking stools out of the rain's reach. She watched clouds drift like slow ships across the afternoon sky. A sense of symmetry nudged her thoughts last year. On this date, clouds had banked over the old courthouse, but they had been thunderheads swollen with tension. These clouds looked lighter too. She walked a clockwise loop around the new clinic cement walls, painted mango yellow solar panels, tilting toward timid sunlight. Farmers pedaled past on creaking bicycles, raising a hand in greeting. Children raced them, toes twirling bare in dusty sand. She inhaled the smell of fish sauce, jasmine, distant diesel. Every breath felt unafraid. Back at the guest house, she found Ava napping on the rattan sofa, the half-eaten cake box balanced on her belly. Elena covered her with a woven throw and stepped onto the balcony. A breeze stirred the lotus jars along the rail, leaves fluttering like quiet applause. She took her notebook, the one labeled Rural Health Trust, Field Notes, and turned to a blank page. At the top she wrote, Year 1, Lessons Learned. 1. Trust lives where transparency flourishes. 2. Charity isn't penance, it's investment. 3. Silence heals when it's yours, not forced. 4. Identity is never collateral again. She paused, tapping the pen, then added a 5th line. 5. Forgiveness is a gift you give your pulse. Ink glistened, then soaked in. Ava stirred inside. Elena closed the notebook, leaned against the balcony rail, and watched the sky pinken toward dusk. Dragonflies darted like iridescent commas, punctuating the still air. Somewhere down the slope, 2 roosters squabbled over coop territory, a ridiculous small quarrel that carried no hidden debts, no forged signatures. It sounded like life, messy, but unpoisoned. As sunset bled into cobalt, Ava joined her 2 cups of chrysanthemum tea in hand. They drank, feet resting on the warm wooden rail, silence stretching comfortable as woven cotton. The first star pricked the sky, then another. Finally, Elena spoke, voice a low hush, carrying the resonance of a year's worth of dismantled chains. I thought closure would feel like a verdict banging doors shut, she said. It actually feels like leaving them ajar and walking past. Ava clinked her cup gently against Elena's. Doorways are for moving forward, not staring backward. They watched a pair of fireflies float up from the patty's blinking Morse codes no human could decipher. When both insects vanished into a band of trees, Elena set her cup down, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. In voiceover tone, quiet, measured, but carrying across the hum of crickets, her thoughts unfurled. Forgiving isn't a gift for those who wronged me. It's the oxygen I choose after drowning in their smoke. I forgive not because they earned it, but because my next inhale deserves to be light. She opened her eyes. The world looked the same, Patty's buffalo silhouettes, the faint smell of lychee blossoms drifting from somewhere unseen. But inside, something had clicked wholly into place, the compass needle settling on true north after a long tremble. She turned to Ava. Think they'll grow tired of cake next year? Never, her friend grinned. But maybe we add sticky rice and mangosteen. Variety builds resilience. Elena laughed, a bright sound that startled a gecko scuttling across the eave. She stood, stretched arms overhead, and felt bones crack with the satisfying music of readiness. Tonight she would sleep unshielded by courtroom strategies or ledger math. Tomorrow she would wake to new budgets and complicated supply chains. Yes, but they would be hers, guided by an unborrowed signature. She slipped inside, clicked off the single lamp, and let dusk claim the room. On the way to bed, she brushed crumbs from the bakery box, shut the notebook, and placed both on the desk where the old photograph had once waited like an indictment. Now the surface looked clean enough for seedlings. The gecko chirped from the ceiling. Cicadas drummed their unanimous praise of night. Elena slid beneath the light quilt, feeling the mattress accept her weight as something earned, not owed. In the deepening dark, just before sleep, gathered her into its quiet net. She murmured the words again, an epilogue spoken only for the pulse thrumming steady in her wrist. Forgiveness isn't because they deserve mercy. It's because I deserve the peace. And under an ordinary rural sky on the simplest birthday she had ever known, the words held true, steady, luminous, and entirely her own.